And there's our new intro music. Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today's podcast is brought to you by TRX Dinosaurs. They have innovative puppets, posable sculptures, and animatronics, as well as some of their new baby T-Rex puppets, all for sale on their website, trxdinosaurs.com. And by Indiana University Press. Their Life of the Past series is lavishly illustrated and meticulously documented to showcase the latest findings and most compelling interpretations in the ever-changing field of paleontology. Find their books at iupress.indiana.edu. This week, in addition to our new intro music by More Giraffes, it's called Dinosaur. I think we talked about this song a while ago, didn't we?
Briefly, yeah.
Yeah, but we've been working out the details on using that song for a while. But now we have it. And so the biggest request probably in the other field of this year as well as last year's survey.
And in some random reviews.
Yes, is hopefully solved if people like this new intro music. I really like it, so hopefully other people do too. But anyway, we also have Dinosaur of the Day Tarchia this week and a bunch of dinosaur news, including a new dinosaur which was technically from last year. We mentioned it in the last episode we recorded last year before the best of, but we'll finally get to it, wrap up the 2018 dinosaurs. And we have an interview with a pastime podcast, so a ton of stuff this episode. So in addition to our new intro music, we're going to make some other changes this year, thanks to all of you who responded to our survey. We got about 50 responses.
Nice.
And it was really helpful. So we didn't want to really push it out there and put it on Instagram and all over the place, trying to get as many people to answer as possible, because we really just wanted our listeners who listen to it to have the most input on what changes, because you're the people who are affected by any changes. But anyway, the results are a lot of people, like I said, wanted us to change the intro and outro music, which we have already done. We were working on it throughout December, so yeah, we're just putting it into effect now. We created a new $4 level to replace the $1 and $2 levels, and really that's because at $1, we only get about half of the money because there's a lot of credit card fees that are like 30 or 40 cents. And then on top of that, Patreon takes a cut. So we get very little money at these lower levels.
Right. Well, the $1 and $2 level.
Yeah. So actually Patreon basically tells people you probably shouldn't have these really low levels because you end up losing so much money in fees that it's not really worth it. So we're replacing it with a $4 level. And I know for some people that might be too much money. So everybody who's at the $1 and $2 level, get grandfathered in and everything will just stay the same. And for future Patreon supporters, potential supporters, if $4 is too much, you can still do a custom amount in Patreon and do $1 or $2 or whatever amount you're looking for, just in case you can't afford the $4. But along with the $4 tier, we're also going to release a new Discord server because a lot of people said that they really wanted to have a Discord server amongst the options that we posted. I think 2/3 of people said they really wanted it.
Yes, and some people really wanted it.
Yeah, so they put in custom things yes, do this. This is a good idea. So yeah, thank you to everyone for your responses, because now we know that that's what people want the most.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can do that first. We're also looking into launching a patron-only monthly hangout, probably on YouTube or something like that. That one was a little bit less popular, so we're going to do Discord first. And then some other things were much less popular, so we're not really going to worry about that right now.
Maybe next year.
Yeah, exactly. Outside of Patreon, we're probably going to actually start live streaming games on YouTube, hopefully sometime soon, because that's something we can do easily, and a lot of people said they were interested in it.
Plus, there's a lot of games we like.
Yeah, there are. So it's an easy thing to kind of fit into our schedule because we can just play games and talk about them.
Yeah, so thanks so much for taking our survey, and thank you for being a listener.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. I mean, even if you're just a listener, it does help if you spread the word about the podcast, because the more listeners we have, the more attractive we are to advertisers and things like that. And that also helps to keep the podcast lights on and bits streaming. And speaking of patrons that we're thankful to, we have this week's shout outs. And this week we would like to thank Kyle, Brendan Kavanagh, the Tolbert family, Sean Tanagaki, Remy Rodriguez, Marcy, Rohan, Bradley, Bilal, Scully, Avery, Crispy, Cody, Joaquin, Jeb from Arkansas, and Aiden James. And Aiden just joined, so thank you very much.
Yeah, again, thank you so much. You all are amazing and really help us keep motivated, keep doing this. And it's really great to have this community, especially going into a new year.
Yeah, we did get a couple new patrons like near Christmas.
And right after New Year.
Yeah, so that really boosted our self-esteem.
Yeah.
We're going to thank some of you next week too, because we try to spread them out. And for whatever reason, one of the weeks, because we do it like on an alternating 4-week schedule, has like really depleted. A lot of people left from that one. So we needed to like put some of the new patrons in there. So if you joined within the last week and you have a shout out coming your way, it will be the next episode.
Yeah. And if you want to join, make it a New Year resolution, you know. Support your favorite or near favorite dinosaur podcast. And you should check out our rewards on our Patreon at patreon.com/iknowdino.
Yes. And now jumping into our news, thank you to Steve for sharing this one with us. There was an article published in Pure J by Cristiano Dal Sasso and others, and it's all about a new dinosaur found in Italy that we've talked about inadvertently a few times already.
Oh yeah, it's made so many headlines.
There was a lot in this paper. I couldn't read the entire text of it. Sometimes these papers are really short. They're just like 3 or 4 pages. And sometimes they're like 100 pages. This was definitely on the more like 100-page sort of scale of things because they covered so many different topics with this one new discovery. So first of all, what is the dinosaur? It's called Saltriovenator zanellai. And Saltriovenator is after the area Saltrio, where it was found, plus venator, which is Latin for hunter. So it's like the hunter from Saltrio. And zanellai is after Angelo Zanella, who found the fossil. So it's kind of like a typical way to name it. You know, you want to thank the person for their contribution. A lot of the articles that talked about this described it as important because it's so large and old. So there were a lot of titles like the oldest large-sized predator dinosaur.
Right. It was a little misleading.
Kind of, but I mean, they're on the right track. So basically, the way the authors put it is it's, quote, the largest and most robust theropod from the early Jurassic, predating the occurrence in theropods of a body mass approaching 1,000 kilograms by over 25 million years, end quote, which is a little bit more of a precise way to talk about it. And I think when they say that it's predating it by over 25 million years, they're probably talking about Alkylosaurus, because that's about 25 million years later and weighed about 1,000 kilograms. But there were other ones starting to pop up around the same time too. Allosaurus was a little bit later. There was a lot of stuff in the Morrison, which is, like 150 million years. This guy was 198 million years ago. So it's like 50 million years before a lot of the ones that we know about. But it's a ceratosaur, so it's in that same group with all the Abelisaurs and Ceratosaurus and some of the other big guys. Not T-Rex, but some of these other early Jurassic kind of big dinosaurs. Based on the full text of the article buried in there, they had an estimated weight of between 1,270 and 1,620 kilograms, or 2,800 to 3,580 pounds. So that's even more than that 1,000 kilogram mark that they were talking about. And it was about 7 meters or 23 feet long. So Dilophosaurus and Cryolophosaurus were both around at the same time as Saltriovenator. But even though they were about the same length, they're estimated to only be about half the weight of Saltriovenator.
Oh.
So I think that's kind of like the titles where they're saying it's the oldest large-sized predator dinosaur is kind of a weird way to put it because Cryolophosaurus and Dilophosaurus are both known from earlier, like very late Triassic, and they were the same length, and I would consider them large size. They're over 20 feet long. Mm-hmm. But really, they weighed half as much. So if you're doing your definition of a large theropod or a large carnivore as 1,000 kilograms, like a metric ton, then, this really is the first one. So
also, if there was something to scavenge and the 3 of them showed up, Saltriovenator would probably win.
Yeah, that's true. You might be able to scare off the other ones, assuming that the other ones weren't in groups or something. Unfortunately, the specimen that they found is very fragmentary and disarticulated. So it's typical of a lot of European dinosaur fossils. In China, you get these ones that are like perfect. They're like fully articulated. You've got almost every bone. In the US, we tend to get a pretty good chunk of the dinosaur. South America, you get a little bit less. And then in Europe, it's usually just like a few bits and pieces. And that's because Europe was predominantly underwater, which was the case for this one. So it's just whatever made it out to sea and survived all the way till making it to the bottom of the ocean, and then happened to get buried eventually. So it's been out in the elements for a really long time by the time it fossilized. So when all was said and done, they only found small pieces of different bones, but they were from all over the body, which was a little bit helpful. And the reason that this paper covered so much ground, because it included bones from the feet, hands, ribs, arms, and even some tiny pieces of the skull. So they could identify a lot of characteristics about it that helped them place it into Ceratosauria and even specifically within that family tree, as well as a lot of interesting comments about what its hands were like. And since the early Jurassic isn't a very well-known period of time, it's really helpful to kind of fill in gaps about how things were evolving. Really weirdly, though, there were no vertebrae or gastralia found at all. And there's so many vertebrae in a dinosaur with the tail and the back and the neck. There's usually like 100 vertebrae in a dinosaur. It's super strange to not have any parts of any of them. Usually at least you get a little piece of something, but there was nothing. And then also gastralia, there's a lot of ribs found, but those belly rib gastralia were nowhere to be found. And they had a funny hypothesis. They said basically the dinosaur might have gone out to sea doing that bloat and float thing where it died and then bacteria is building up. So it's, puffed up like a balloon. So it's floating across the surface of the ocean. And then eventually the theory is they explode. And they say maybe when it exploded, the gastralia just got blasted away. So they were going to be nowhere around when it fossilized. But the vertebrae is still a little bit confusing to me. But essentially the idea is as it sank into the ocean, things just got scattered around. So since the vertebrae are lighter, or maybe, got ripped off by something, or who knows what, they ended up just going off their own way. I mentioned the hand a little bit. So they say that it has, quote, a fully functional hand, well adapted for struggling and grasping, end quote. And I think when they say it's well adapted for struggling, they mean for grasping struggling things, and not that like the hand helps them struggle, which is what the sentence says. But
oh, yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, just like a weird way to word it. But it's important because people have been wondering for a long time kind of what kind of hands these early ceratosaurs might have had, and this kind of helps fill in that gap. It was found in the Italian Alps, north of Milan and near the Swiss border, which is, it's always just crazy to me. So this is like now on top of a mountain, basically. But back in the Mesozoic, it was underwater. And their best guess is that it's a close relative to Szechuanosaurus, which is another early ceratosaur. Another kind of typical body plan, like a tetanurine sort of thing. You've got the tail sticking out behind it, big strong legs, big three-toed feet, relatively big arms in this case. Usually you think of them as being smaller, like in some of the later carnivores. And then you've got the big head with the sharp serrated teeth for eating meat and the probably binocular vision. They didn't find really any part of the skull that would be useful for figuring out its senses. They, I think, only found a tooth and then a couple little pieces of the jaw, basically, maybe some of the palate. So not a lot of information about the skull. Another really interesting piece of this paper, like another chapter in the paper basically, was about the taphonomy. And again, the taphonomy is what happened to the dinosaur before it was fully fossilized. And they say that it, quote, shows bone bioerosion by marine invertebrate, which is a first for dinosaurian remains, and suggest a complex history for the carcass before being deposited on a well-oxygenated and well-illuminated sea bottom, end quote.
Well-illuminated?
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting little tidbit. So I guess it didn't have to sink that far if it's well-illuminated, because I think sunlight only makes it a couple hundred feet into the ocean. But they said it has 30, quote-unquote, macro borings on it. And when you look at it, it looks kind of like pieces were scooped out with an ice cream scoop. But this is solid bone at the time. So They believe that that was caused by 3 different animals, depending on the shape. They had like 3 totally different shapes of these macro borings. One of them looks like it was an animal gnawing on the edge of the bone.
It's probably a tasty bone.
Yeah. I mean, there was probably little traces of like cartilage or something on there. Another was from an invertebrate, likely an anchorage trace. And by that, I think they mean that it's like a barnacle. So it's kind of like anchoring onto it, but then it's filter feeding or doing something else. So it's just a trace of something that's sticking to it. But when it sticks to it, it has to basically, carve out a little spot to grip onto. And then the third one was another invertebrate, which could have been a lot of different things, but my favorite was a bone-eating worm.
That's a thing?
Yeah. So I guess in the ocean, there are all these things that eat bone, and some of them are worms. It's kind of disturbing, but...
Or they clean it up.
They do, yeah. Pretty interesting. I've never really seen a dinosaur fossil look quite like this with all these different markings on it. And it might also be that they got such a good age on it because they estimate it's 198 million years old because it was in the marine sediment. Because a lot of these animals that live in the ocean evolved really rapidly. And we have a really good record of what age specifically all these marine things were around. So if something fossilizes with them, you can say like, oh, that's that specific type of brachiopod. And therefore we know it's from sometimes even as specific as like 100,000 plus or minus years. So it can be really helpful, even though it also kind of destroys the fossil, like in this case.
Trade-off.
Yeah. Like I said, there was a lot of discussion about the hands and specifically the question of how 2 fingers kind of went missing in dinosaurs because we all know theropods basically ended with 3 fingers. Think of things like Allosaurus and modern birds, for example, all have 3 fingers.
Well, but Tyrannosaurus had 2.
Yes, but that's like going from 3 to 2. Most other things kept 3 for a long time. And we've kind of wondered, mostly because of the birds, since modern birds still have 3, how they ended up with the exact arrangement that they have. I didn't realize that it's still a little bit unclear. And this paper is kind of another piece in that puzzle, basically showing that these early large ceratosaurs still had big useful hands and arms, meaning that they shrank pretty quickly during the Jurassic. Because, for example, Lemusaurus, which is less than 40 million years later, it's still right in the middle of the Jurassic, has these really puny forelimbs. They're tiny. They're almost like Alvarezsaur size. It's like you barely see them on the body, despite the fact that this is a small-sized dinosaur and doesn't have that big of a skull. So it's not like a T-Rex where it has this huge skull and therefore it loses its arms to kind of counterbalance potentially. So there's like weird pressures happening that we really still don't understand because you've got an earlier one that's really big and has big arms. And then 40 million years later, you've got a relative that's much smaller and has essentially no useful arms. So like, what is happening? We really don't know. But this is like another useful piece in the puzzle because we didn't have that one spot for ceratosaurs. And then finally, I think one of the more interesting hypotheses in the paper was just the fact that this dinosaur existed, this big, robust, early Jurassic predator, might help to explain why sauropods started to get big in the early Jurassic.
As a defense mechanism?
Yeah, exactly. So before that, you had things like Dilophosaurus, which don't look like they could take down a sauropodomorph really because they're just not big enough. They're pretty slender. They look like they're built for speed and kind of being quick and stuff like that. Whereas this guy is a little bit more of like a brute.
Interesting.
Might go after a little bit larger prey.
What would make this one so large, though?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe eating prosauropods. But, I mean, it's still really hypothetical because it's still very beneficial to have space for big guts and to be able to reach up high to get different plants. But it could be some combination. This could be another element.
Oh, you mean the sauropods for the big guts and reaching up high?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the fact that something else was trying to eat them might have been another factor in sort of the exact body plan that sauropods ended up having.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. But yeah, it was quite a discovery from just like these really fragmentary remains. Had really interesting taphonomy on them, had a big puzzle piece for the way hands evolved in early dinosaurs, and then also potentially, impacts into sauropods all from one like super fragmentary pile of bones that aren't even lined up in the right way. And then we also have an ankylosaur paper because we got to cover those when they come out.
Of course.
This one came out of the Whitmer lab by Jason M. Bork and others and published in PLOS One, which is great because that means it's open access and you can go read it if you're interested. The previous one was in PureJ too, which is also open access. So if you want to go through and read everything that I didn't thoroughly explain, because if I just read that paper, it would probably take like 3 hours. And that's not the most exciting podcast.
No, not terribly compelling audio.
No. But if you want to see all the pictures too, that's the best thing about open access is you can go see what these dinosaurs looked like. But this new article is talking about the quote-unquote convoluted nasal passages, which are an enigmatic hallmark of Ankylosauria.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because for a long time, it's been thought that essentially there are these weird maze-like nasal passages in ankylosaurs, and they might have been used as a heat exchanger. And these researchers decided to use a fluid dynamics model to see how well that would actually work. So it's all nice to sort of look at modern analogs and kind of guess at what might be effective as a heat exchanger, but no one had actually tested to see if it would work, which is always a good thing to do. So specifically, they tested Panoplosaurus and Euoplocephalus. And Euoplocephalus is especially crazy in its nasal maze thing. If you think of an ankylosaur head, it's kind of like a triangle which is rounded in the front. It's got kind of a rounded snout, but at the back, it's fairly triangular with the horns and everything. And then its eyes are pretty close to those triangular points. So it's got this big old snout in the front. And then on top of that, its nose sort of on top is pretty bulbous. It's got like a pretty like big bump on top of its snout. And that bump is just filled with this crazy winding maze of nasal passages. Yeah, like I said, for a long time, it's like, okay, well, maybe that's for transferring heat. Because if you just have a straight shot through there, it doesn't spend a lot of time in the head. It doesn't have a lot of contact with the surrounding, head material to transfer heat. So maybe that's why they had it. And on Euoplocephalus especially, its head is pretty wide. It's like almost as wide as an ankylosaurus head. Maybe not quite that wide, but it's a lot wider than a lot of other ankylosaurs. And so this maze takes up a ton of space and it zigs and zags all over the place throughout the front of its head. Panoplosaurus is a little more simple. It's got a much narrower head, and to me, it's got what look like a pair of French horns, so one for each nostril, basically, with way fewer twists. And it kind of makes sense because it's got a narrower head, so there isn't as much space anyway. In the past, with dinosaurs of the day, we've made comments like the nasal passages may have been used to help cool their brains, since their head had so much armor insulating their brain, and things like that. And as I was reading this, I was like, oh man, I really hope that it's not a complete opposite of that and like negates all these dinosaurs that we've talked about. And fortunately, it essentially panned out. But there's an added element of efficiency to it. So having these nasal passages, in addition to helping cool the brain, also helps them recover heat and water vapor rather than just exhaling all of it. So if you think about it, when you breathe in, you actually do cool your brain too a little bit and your head, because the air you're breathing in is hopefully colder than your brain, which is about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And then when it gets to your lungs, it's a little bit warmer, which makes things a little bit easier for your body too. And then when you breathe out, the opposite happens. So it's at your body temperature now. And then as it goes through your nose is actually fairly cool. If you've ever looked at a thermal camera, it's one of the cooler parts of the head. Your exhaling actually helps warm your nose a little bit. So it's kind of like it helps cool things you want to cool on the way in, and it helps warm things you want to warm on the way out. So it's pretty efficient process. Yeah, exactly. And then on top of that, if it's going through a really twisted canal, when it's in your lungs, there's a lot of moisture. And if it goes through your nasal passages that are all windy, a little bit of that moisture might get caught. And then you don't have to resupply all that. You're not getting dehydrated as quickly, basically. And if you take that one step further, too, in addition to not having to drink as much, if you're saving energy, not having to heat this air, you don't have to eat as much. So it actually saves calories, which is always a benefit, because if you're an animal out in the wild, finding food is always a major priority. And if you don't have to find as much, that's a big benefit. And in fact, the authors say, quote, Panoplosaurus and Euoplocephalus would have required 833 and 1,568 thermal calories, respectively, to warm a single breath of air by 20 degrees Celsius. Heat recovery during exhalation results in energy savings of 65% for Panoplosaurus and 84% for Euoplocephalus. That's a huge savings in terms of heating. And I should mention, the calories that we usually talk about are kilocalories versus thermal calories. So it's not 833 calories like that we eat per breath. It's like 0.8 if you do that math. But that's still, like every time you're breathing, you do a lot of breathing. Yeah.
It's necessary.
Yes. They also compared the nasal passages to modern animals, including this animal called the spiny-tailed lizard, which have a kind of similar zigzag airway in the front of their snout, but their eyes are a lot farther forward, so there isn't quite as much space. And they found that ankylosaurs had a really similar efficiency to a lot of modern animals. So we also get, like I said, these same kind of benefits from the way we breathe. And in terms of why there was such a big difference between these two ankylosaurs, they hypothesized that Euoplocephalus may have needed more complex nasal passages because it might have spent more time grazing in the open, saying, quote, this extensive time under a constant beating sun, coupled with the heat production from vast quantities of fermenting vegetation in the gut, may have placed a higher heat load on the brain of Euoplocephalus as opposed to Panoplosaurus.
Interesting.
End quote. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I never thought about like it's heating up because it's got this big like bioreactor
digesting,
in its gut.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's important to keep the brain cool. And when they breathe in and they have this heat exchanger in their head, it really helps. One final random note, I think they said it in an interview with Smithsonian or something, one of the authors did, is that maybe these nasal passages might have also been used as like a resonating chamber, kind of like we talk about in Parasaurolophus with its huge crest and making vocalizations through it, that maybe ankylosaurs could make some really interesting sounds using these nasal passages as well.
That's a fun thought.
Yeah. So there could be other uses for it. This was just kind of a proof of concept that it would help to cool a brain if that's what they wanted to do.
I don't know that they're thinking about that or that they thought about that.
That's true. I always kind of attribute a sort of intention to evolution, but this is all just happening naturally for sure.
And they just took advantage of it.
Yep.
By eating out in the open while fermenting the gut contents.
Yeah. I don't think we even know that it ate out in the open more. They were just saying like maybe it had worse food, so it had to get out in the open to find more or something. So it's very speculative in terms of the differences between the two. But
got it.
The fluid mechanics show that it would work.
Cool. One other news of the new year, The Guardian published an update on Rio's National Museum, and you may remember that one burned down in a fire last September. So a team of 60 people from the museum have been working on rescuing the items from the ashes. So far, they found 1,500 items or so. The museum had about 20 million.
Oh, boy.
But that's something. And these include indigenous bowls, arrowheads, and an axe, as well as the Lutzia, the 11,500-year-old skull. And there's hope that they're going to make a new museum with these items. By February, the building should be secure enough for real excavation work. Right now, the team's picking through ruins. There's no reopening date yet for the museum, but one spokesperson said that it would take 3 years. And there's plans to make the museum reach more Brazilians and garner more interest, basically to help them get more funding in the future to prevent things like this from happening.
Yeah, because that was a lot of people were talking about. They couldn't get funding to upgrade their fire prevention systems that they had been complaining about in their wiring or something like that.
Yeah, and it sounds like part of that was their visitor numbers have been going down.
Oh, that's too bad.
Some happier news, the Bayville dinosaur in Berkeley Township, New Jersey is now fully restored and back. I feel like this story comes up pretty often for us.
Because these dinosaurs, is that the one that keeps getting hit by trucks?
Yeah. And now it's back. They had a dedication ceremony in late December. The dinosaur was once called Dino. Now it's called Bud. To honor Charles Bud Magahan, who's the treasurer of the Berkeley Township Historical Society. And that society is the reason that Bud is now restored.
Nice.
Yeah, they moved the dinosaur further away, so he's less likely to get hit by cars and trucks.
Yeah, because it's like on the side of a highway, right?
Yeah. So he's been fully renovated, and he's got new glass eyes.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
fancy. Not just painted on eyes.
I think he had fancy eyes before.
Cool.
At some point, some part of him lit up. I don't remember the details.
Oh, nice.
Not anymore.
The electronics were destroyed by a
truck.
Rampant semi.
We've also got an update on the dinosaurs in Drumheller. So over the summer, 3 of the about 30 dinosaur statues were damaged. And now the Drumheller Dino Arts Association has partnered with local artists to create replacements in the same style. The originally were built in the 1960s and based on a 1940s encyclopedia, which makes sense when you look at them.
Yeah.
It fits very well. So the statues, the new ones for the 3 replacement ones, are about halfway done. They're going to go on display in the spring. One of them, Garrett, it's going to be an ankylosaurus.
Hey.
There's a sketch draft.
Nice.
Yeah. And community members can volunteer to paint the statues.
Cool.
Which could be really fun.
Yeah, that would be fun. Some of them had really interesting paint jobs. Like there's one painted like Batman and stuff.
I think Batman was one of the ones that was destroyed.
Oh, you're right. It was.
So we'll see. And last, the movie Aquaman is out. We haven't seen it yet, but apparently there's some dinosaurs in it. It's only for a few seconds, but there's some, quote, cute little beach dinosaurs that look like tiny T-Rex, according to Bustle. And they live at Earth's core. Hopefully that doesn't spoil the movie. I know nothing about the movie.
Me either. I wonder, tiny T-Rex. So, yeah, I don't know.
It sounded like, again, hopefully this isn't a spoiler, but I don't know anything about it. Because they're at Earth's core, why not have random dinosaurs?
Well, I mean, Journey to the Center of the Earth and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and stuff did stuff like that, where there's like ancient stuff. So I guess they're just copying that.
Yeah. But actual dinosaurs, Gary, you were worried when you saw the headline that they meant mosasaur or plesiosaur or pterosaur.
Yeah. There's those water dinosaurs in the movie.
Yeah.
You know, sharks. And speaking of real dinosaurs, we want to thank our sponsor, TRX Dinosaurs, makers of puppets, sculptures, and animatronics, as well as a new baby T-Rex puppet. And it has now moved on from just the Kickstarter page to trxdinosaurs.com. So if you missed out on the Kickstarter, you can head over to trxdinosaurs.com and still pick up a baby T-Rex puppet.
Yeah, we got ours.
We did. You should be able to see it on our Instagram.
It's very friendly looking.
It's orange and yellow and has blue eyes.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly what Sabrina was looking for.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm excited. It's got quite a heft to it, which I was expecting.
Yeah, they talk about how it's a little bit heavier because it's made out of polyurethane foam, which is a different foam, I think, than what they use in some of their other custom work. And it gives it kind of a different texture than you might expect. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it looks really nice. Goes well with all our other dinosaur decor.
It does.
Plus this one we can make move and talk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you go to their Instagram at TRX Dinosaurs, there's a lot of posts about the making of these baby T-Rex puppets, and you can see the molds and a lot of works in progress. Also, a lot of other work in progresses that aren't the baby T-Rex, the custom work, but really cool. Oh, and there's pictures and videos of people playing with the puppets, and they all look like they're having fun.
So yeah, if you want your own custom dinosaur sculpture or animatronic or puppet, or you want one of these T-Rex baby puppets, then head over to trxdinosaurs.com and make sure to follow them on Instagram at trxdinosaurs if you want to see what they're up to. And now we're going to go on to our interview with the Pastime podcast, which is the second half of the crossover. They already aired the half that was on their podcast, so if you want to hear some of the stuff that we might allude to, then check out the Pastime podcast.
I'm Adam Pritchard.
I'm Matt Bortz.
And I'm Catherine Early, and this is not Pastime.
So we're joined this week by the hosts of the podcast Pastime, and they are also all paleontologists, not just one paleontologist, unless they like their forces combined into a Voltron-like super podcaster.
It's been known to happen.
Yeah. And we met them at SVP. We were actually sitting at the, what do they call that dinner?
The banquet.
Yeah, the banquet.
Yeah, the banquet dinner with some of them, and then started talking about podcasts. I was like, oh, you have a podcast? We have a podcast. Let's podcast together.
So here we are.
Yeah. So what inspired you guys to start your podcast?
That's all Matt.
Take it away.
Adam and I had really intense, nerdy conversations about how much we love fossils that started in grad school. And it got to a point where it's just I wanted to capture it from my own, because like capturing what was in Adam's brain and carrying it around in my pocket was something I really wanted. And I've also always been interested in video and audio editing and listening to a lot of podcasts. And so then it became, that's a way to capture this thing. And I think it was also, we were really interested in finding a way to do more active outreach. And there wasn't really a museum that we were connected to at Stony Brook University, which is where we were both grad students. And so the way that we could kind of do outreach into classrooms, because we didn't have a museum to kind of share fossils from, was to kind of do it from a distance. And so we would use pastime as a way to introduce ourselves to classrooms and have kind of teachers and students watch our short videos or listen to introductions. And then we would come in with like Skype tours of our labs and show fossils that we couldn't really bring a classroom of students in to see, but we could at least give them kind of the primer and then have a chance to interact with paleontologists, even if it was just on Skype. And so those two kinds of pieces were what we did as the beginning of pastime, was using it as a way to do outreach and also to capture the conversations between us. And then with all the paleontologists we got to interact with and try to share everything that we've been learning from each other and from other people who are coming to Stony Brook.
Nice.
Cool.
I kind of thought he was nuts at the beginning because I wasn't quite sure if there were people who were out there that were interested in listening to this kind of stuff. I was thoroughly and completely wrong, which I'm very glad to report.
You were really shocked that there weren't already like 150 paleontology podcasts.
Was I? Oh, wow.
Like, there was only one. Like Paleocast was the only other podcast really that had gotten going. And right around the time that we got rolling, I think Paleo After Dark got started too. But it's such a rich field that weaves through so many different branches of science that there aren't 150 of us yet is also strange. There's more, and that's really exciting how many different voices there are and how many different stories there are to tell. But it still is kind of amazing that there aren't, even 5 years ago, as podcasts were really getting rolling and Serial was getting a lot of people hooked on this stuff, that there weren't more fossil-centered paleontology podcasts going on. And so that was kind of like going into, it's like, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe no one will listen, but it ended up building nicely. And then there's this large community of people who do this now, which is really exciting.
And I got involved in the pastime world because Matt, after leaving Stony Brook, he and Adam had to part ways because they both got their PhDs, and it was really hard on both of them. The parting ways.
Still is.
PhD, whatever. They survived. And Matt started a postdoc at Ohio University, which is where I'm currently finishing up my PhD. And so we met, we chatted a little while. He, I guess, got to know me and saw that I've been really involved in outreach kind of since high school. I was really lucky to be involved in a program at a museum growing up that let me do outreach with live animals. And that kind of just kept going on and on. It hasn't stopped yet. And so once I got into paleontology, I got more into the paleo side of outreach. And so Matt saw that I was involved in that and invited me to come to Pastime. And while I listened to podcasts, I had never thought of being on one myself, let alone doing one. So kudos to them for thinking about starting one. It's been a great way to continue outreach, but also for me, one of the things I like about being in this field is getting to know about new research, but also the people behind that research. Working in this medium where you get to interview a lot of people and introduce their work to a totally new audience was really appealing to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I should also say that the other reason we needed Catherine is because neither Adam nor I are actual dinosaur experts. We needed to add that to the toolkit to be to really cover what the people want to hear, as you guys know.
Wait, all paleontologists aren't just experts in dinosaurs?
What?
Yeah.
Some of them even study invertebrates.
Oh, that's crazy.
But we like those too.
Yeah.
They're useful for dating dinosaurs.
Oh gosh. You kind of touched on this, the fact that there are not 150 podcasts on paleontology because there's so many topics to cover. But Pastime covers a pretty wide range of topics. How do you decide what you're going to talk about each time?
Oh boy.
I see something cool in the literature when I check it in the morning, when I check my RSS feeds and think, hey, this is cool. I mean, it really, in a way, it really is that simple.
So, is there anything else you want to share about your show before I switch over to asking you guys specific questions about your research?
I think one thing, as far as the founding of it, was trying to get at the idea that our show is trying to appeal to maybe a younger audience than is necessarily listening to podcasts. The way that we try to kind of think of what we're doing is taking the dino kids who are getting kind of the books with lots of facts and bridging that into how to understand the actual science that goes into the discovery. So how do you try to target something to someone who's like somewhere between like 8 and 13, help them understand how paleontology discoveries actually happen? Because there's a little bit of a gap in the kinds of resources that are available. We have resources for little kids, and then we have some stuff for that middle age. But then, like, if you actually want to get in and understand what makes it new and different, one way to do that, hopefully, is by going out and learning what some of these words mean. And so defining terms and how these discoveries happen is hopefully part of what Pastime does.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because there is a ton of stuff for maybe like 8 and under where it's like every kid is super into dinosaurs, and then there's a lot of stuff for adults with, the real scientific research. But yeah, that in-between phase, there is a lot less for sure. I think when I was around that age, I just struggled through reading these like really thick paleontologist authored books and like didn't understand half of it. You have to have a dictionary on one side and the book on the other side, and then most of the words aren't even in the dictionary because they were like made up for that paper, and you're like, what is this?
But then every so often you rewatch Jurassic Park or
Yeah. It's true too.
You Adam Richard with your JVP subscription at 14.
I didn't. Well, yeah, but like I knew what any of it meant. I remember I was really excited. Yeah, I got like my dad got me a JVP subscription when I was 14 years old. So that's like 2001, and I was just so flabbergasted by all the terminology and the pictures of fossils that I couldn't interpret at all. I remember being really excited when one issue had a life reconstruction of a pterosaur's head with its crest and everything, and I was like, "Oh, I know what this is. I recognize this."
Yeah, that's really cool. So, I want to ask Adam a specific question. So I believe I read that you did some work at Ghost Ranch. Is that correct?
Quite a bit, yes.
Did you find any dinosaurs while you were there?
I'm not allowed to say.
Oh no!
No, it's fine. No, I've found a few dinosaurs. So the material that I work on from Ghost Ranch at the Hayden Quarry is beautiful. It's this beautifully preserved, almost oily black bone with a blue sheen to it that you can see all the fine textural features, muscle scars, that kind of stuff.
Wow.
But by and large, it's disarticulated. So I've never found a dinosaur skeleton per se, but I found lots of isolated like limb bones and vertebrae and things like that from dinosaurs, and a lot of the close cousins of dinosaurs like silosaurs or lagurpitids, some of these weird dinosaur, what used to be thought of as dinosaur precursors, but now, as it turns out, were basically cousins that lived right alongside the earliest true dinosaurs.
Awesome. What makes the fossils that like black and shiny sort of color?
I don't know. Something to do with the preservational environment, but I don't know if like the sort of geochemistry behind that has been worked out at this point.
Yeah, those are some of my favorite fossils, though. Like one of my favorites is Black Beauty at the Royal Tyrrell Museum
Hmm.
that has that same kind of like black sheen to it, and it's so I don't know, it's kind of awe-inspiring.
Yeah. No, it makes it. I gotta say, one thing about them. This is just me whining. You can totally cut this if you want to, but one thing that's frustrating about them is it makes them so hard to photograph.
Oh yeah,
Because photography with paleontology, to make things for specimens, you want every fine detail to be captured in that photo at all the different sort of focal depths to make something that's useful to other paleontologists in an article. But if you've got bone that is so dark and shadowy, and it kind of washes out that kind of detail, so I kind of have to like floof it over with like dust to get those textures to pop.
Interesting.
yeah,
I never thought about that.
One of the reasons I think the micro CT revolution kind of took off really in the early like Bridger Basin, like mammal evolution stuff is because the fossils that are from like the Paleocene, early Eocene are also all black. And trying to figure those was really hard. But if you can then scan it, render it in a software program that you can adjust the color, then your figures can really make the specimens pop. And I've always wondered how much the image was what convinced people to then also go ahead and commit to getting the internal structure of these things too, because at least see something on these black specimens. And then people are like, oh yeah, and you can also look at how dental eruption sequences work, and you can look at brain endocasts, and look at all this other stuff we have now that we can also like look at the image and not squint and not just see a black hole.
yeah, that's really cool. We interviewed somebody from the Idaho Virtualization Lab, I don't know, a couple of years ago, I think now,
Hmm.
and he was talking about the same thing with, I don't remember which specimens they were, but they were also really dark, and scanning them with structured light or something, and how it like never worked right because it wouldn't reflect properly, and so they had to do things to them. But you don't want to mess with them too much because it's like a holotype or something, and you don't want to just like paint it white, which I think was the standard, like because the structured light thing they were using wasn't originally intended for paleontology, it was for scanning something else. And that was like what the manual said. It's like, well, just paint it white, and then you'll be able to scan it fine. Like, not gonna paint this fossil. Dust is a good idea, though. I like that. So, Adam, can you tell us what dinosaurs you think they were from, or is that the big top secret
Sure.
part of it?
No, that's all out into the world. So primarily the site I work at Ghost Ranch, there are only two known true dinosaurs species. One does not have a name yet. It is a coelophysoid, so an animal closely related to the classic Coelophysis boweri, the kind of prototypical Western North American Triassic dinosaur.
Mhm.
It's a bit bigger. It's not known from many really well understood remains. The other animal is unique to the Ghost Ranch area, as far as I know. It's called Tawa hale.
Hmm.
It was described originally in, I think, 2009 as a very early member of the Theropod lineage, kind of bridging the gap between the very ancient members that had been associated with that lineage, the Herrerasaurs from South America, and then the kind of the Coelophysis level of things within theropods. As of late, as I'm guessing you've talked about on the show, the phylogeny, the evolutionary trees of early dinosaurs are in a state of constant flux,
Yeah.
I guess I would say. And as a consequence of that, well, the coelophysoids, they tend to stay over with the theropod side of things, so that's probably what that is. But Tawa has hopped around from being a theropod to being being a saurischian before you get the theropod sauropodomorph split to being something to do with Ornithosolidia. So it's the size of a German Shepherd. It has pointy serrated teeth and kind of a long snaggletooth snout. I can say that much.
Very
And if any
Coelophysis-like
of
thing.
your
Yeah.
if any of the I Know Dino listeners do want to know more about Ghost Ranch material and the ecosystem at the time, Adam did a more in-depth pastime episode a few episodes back. So maybe we can link to that episode so people can find it.
Oh yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
that'd be great.
Cool. Have you ever worked with Herrerasaurs, as you mentioned them?
You know, it's funny. There's an animal from Western North America, from Petrified Forest, called Chindisaurus, ghost lizard, which is a name I absolutely love. And Chindisaurus has been described as a Herrerasaur, and I've seen the fossils of that in person. I've not really studied them in depth, but that's another dinosaur that sort of hops around the evolutionary tree of things. So no, I don't think I've ever with a legit Herrerasaur. I haven't actually seen collections in South America. It's something I want to do at some point, but haven't had the chance yet.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I think when you were mentioning things moving around, Herrerasaurs are always the one where it's like, where do we put these things?
I mean, it looks
so
like
weird.
If we could make a statement about evolutionary history based solely on ecology, it's like, oh, well, yeah. I mean, they look like theropods. They got the theropody teeth and the theropody head and everything like that. But the reality is, with all the craziness that's been happening at the base of the dinosaur tree, we don't know a lot about what the ecology of the ancestral population of dinosaur actually looked like.
Yeah.
I mean, we can be pretty sure it was on the carnivore side of things, but how much it looked like a theropod versus like a really early sauropodomorph like Eoraptor or Panphasia, it's up for grabs.
Yeah, that's true.
Wait, there's an animal called Panphasia?
Yes.
What is Panphasia?
It's a sauropodomorph. It's cute. It looks like Eoraptor, but like with a stumpier, more low slung body, much more kind of sauropodomorph, leafy iguana-ish teeth, and it's
heterodon.
I think so. Yeah,
huh.
It's Ishugolasto, so it's latest Carnian, earliest Norian, so like 225, something like that.
Pretty grand name.
It is.
It is.
It's like it gets to be the omnivore.
Yeah.
Like a bear should have been called Panphasia, but
yeah, that's true.
So sorry. I'm so sorry.
I'm now just kind of bummed that that's preoccupied. Not that the sauropod didn't, or pro-sauropod didn't deserve it, but
oh my God,
come on.
He's gonna go off like this.
There are raccoons.
Yes, they're called Procyon, and you can live with that.
Here we go with mammals.
This happens a lot between us. It's okay. You can cut this. It's fine.
Maybe omniphagia might still be available if you want to go for something like that.
Hang on, I'm gonna write that down.
No, not for you, Adam.
I got some things that could use that.
Or out of his back pocket.
Since we just started talking about mammals a little bit, Matt, you work at like a lemur zoo in North Carolina, right?
The coolest lemur zoo.
Yeah. Well, it's yeah. So I work at the Duke Lemur Center, which does have animals on exhibit, but the animals is actually a research center more than anything else, where the research that takes place here is all non-invasive behavioral research and kind of physiological research on the animals that is trying to understand basically how lemurs make a living, because they are the most endangered group of mammals that we know of. And this population of lemurs has been living in North Carolina for over 50 years now. It's the largest population of lemurs outside of Madagascar. And so the folks who've been working in the Lemur Center they have questions about gut biota. So they go out and collect fecal samples from ringtail lemurs and from black and white ruffed lemurs and from chafox and all this remarkable diversity of lemurs that we have, to understand how and what they eat, what kinds of population sizes they like to live in, how much land they need, so that all of that can be translated into conservation goals, which are other conservationists who also work at the Lemur Center and in Madagascar, to try to figure out how do we take what we're learning here in this very safe, protected population and apply that to the more threatened populations that are actually living in Madagascar. And my job here is as the curator of fossil primates, because we have to connect the dots between lemurs and humans. If we're studying lemurs and we're learning a little bit more about what it means to be a primate, lemurs kind of broke off from the rest of the primate family tree pretty early on in the evolution of primates. And we're learning some really fascinating things about how lemurs work together. They tend to be matrilineal. That is, they're kind of like female-led social populations. The mouse lemur turns out to have Alzheimer's. It develops plaques in its brain that look almost exactly like the plaques that humans develop.
Wow.
And so they end up being a really interesting group of animals to study. Like only a certain percent of the population is affected. And they're animals that kind of live fast and die young. They're small. They come by their name, honestly, as mouse lemurs. And that means that you can study the life cycle of these animals. You can actually look at what are they eating, how are they interacting with each other, and how does that influence who ends up getting Alzheimer's and who doesn't. And that can be used then as a model for understanding how it develops in humans. But of course, if we want to figure out how a lemur can tell us anything about what it means to be human, we have to travel through the primate evolutionary tree to connect those dots. And so the Division of Fossil Primates at the Lemur Center sets out to do that, where we have collections here, over 35,000 specimens, that chart kind of the major branches along the primate family tree. So we have big collections from Wyoming, where a lot of early primate evolution took place actually in North America and in Asia and in Europe. And that's kind of when lemurs broke off from the rest of the family tree. So we have these kind of early lemur-like primates in one collection. We have a big collection from Egypt, which is about 36 to 28 million years old. And that's when the ancestors of monkeys and apes kind of cropped up. And that takes place in Africa. So you get some primates that are the ancestors to us, basically, dispersed from the northern continents into Africa. And they radiate. And some of those animals that got in end up going to Madagascar. And some go across the Atlantic Ocean to become the South American monkeys. And others stay put and they diverge into old world monkeys and apes. And then we have another collection that's from the Miocene. So that's a period about 19 million years ago when this stuff was deposited. And that's when apes are really starting to diversify. And then we have this really massive collection from Madagascar, where while all of this is going on in mainland Africa and in the rest of the world, lemurs have dispersed to Madagascar and are basically doing all of the things that primates are doing in the rest of the world, only on one island. So we have a subfossil lemur collection. The oldest fossils are only about 12,000 years old, and the youngest are only about 300 years old. And that documents this huge diversity of all kinds of animals that used to live in Madagascar. A lot of them have gone extinct, and it's mostly the big animals. So we have elephant bird fossils. We have giant lemur fossils. So there's lemurs named things like Megalatopus, that is the size of a gorilla.
Wow.
We have things like Paleopropithecus, which is a relative to fox, which is the Zabubufu lemur. Only its relatives they're basically sloths. They're called sloth lemurs. They kind of hang underneath branches. They have super long claws, and they lost their thumbs. And so they're kind of walking around underneath branches as far as we can tell. And they're like the size of German shepherds. They're just like German shepherds hanging under branches. There's monkey-like lemurs that have short faces and big brains and big crushing teeth that look very ape-like. It's just this crazy diversity of animals. And so all of that is part of the Duke Lemur Center fossil collection. And so now I'm the curator of that.
Wow, that's
Nice.
really cool.
Congrats. Yeah.
Can you tell he loves his job?
Can you tell I'm working on writing a grant about all of this?
Oh.
I really feel like I understand the broader impacts and the intellectual merit of your collections.
We're going to use podcasts to tell people about what's going on. Hey!
Yeah.
Nice. So when were the first lemurs? Did they overlap with dinosaurs at all? I know nothing about lemurs.
That is a great question, and one that is at the core of mammal evolution. When we look at molecular evidence, it seems like a lot of mammal groups, like primates and the relatives of primates, diverged from other groups of mammals during the end of the age of dinosaurs. The fossil record, though, doesn't give us animals that look like primates until the Paleocene. So we're looking at a time period after the extinction of the dinosaurs up until like 55 million years ago. And that's when these early lemur-like relatives first appear in the fossil record. So it's entirely possible that lemur-like primates or primates themselves originate earlier, and we're just not getting them in the fossil record. So a hunt is on to try to figure out where that kind of these origins are. And so that's we don't know where bats come from. We don't know where a lot of hoofed animals come from. Like the early relatives of a lot of major groups of mammals are very mysterious. And that's actually part of the reason why I study mammals, is because looking at this modern radiation, we can walk it back and try to build hypotheses about what we think the common ancestor of a hooved animal like a horse and a hooved animal like a deer would have looked like. And then how do you get whale into that picture?
Yeah.
Yeah, the whale evolution is awesome.
Yeah.
So, Catherine, I wanted to ask you, you study bird brains? Is this correct?
Yes, I do study bird brains.
So my main question is, are dinosaurs going to re-inherit the Earth as they continue to get more intelligent?
Well, let's see. We're upwards, I think, of 10,000 species of birds right now. So you could make the argument that they already have. I think probably the biggest thing that's holding back, avian dinosaurs, and for that matter, cephalopods like octopus from inheriting the Earth is the whole like hands thing. For birds, hands are really useful if you're going to manipulate the environment around you. And that, cephalopods are kind of stuck in the water. So they're real smart, but they're not going to change the environment in the way that humans have. But I think birds are doing pretty okay for themselves for the most part.
Yeah. And there was one talk at SVP too, where it was showing how like some of the birds are like getting rapidly more intelligent. Like just exploding. And they were saying that it's kind of mimicking the way that primates evolved in the diversification and then this like rapid intelligence increase. And then everybody, you see movies like The Birds and you're like, yeah, they're plotting. And like crows can like hold grudges and remember people. Yeah.
They hold funerals, apparently.
Yeah.
The talk you're talking about is a very large collaborative project. And my name is buried there in the author list, along with many other great people who work on bird brains. And the person who presented it, one of the lead authors, Dan Sepka, was actually my undergrad advisor. And he's kind of the reason that I got started on my interest in the evolution of bird brains. And regarding that project, he likes to come up to us and make us say, crows are the hominids of the bird world.
Yeah, he did have a picture that was like that evolution of man, except at the end it was like a crow with the like stick over its shoulder or whatever.
Yes, I really enjoyed the graphics he used in that talk and the animations to demonstrate the evolutionary pathways.
So what are you studying? Like where have you gone with this sort of related research?
So my dissertation focuses on the brain endocasts of birds because you can't get a brain, the true like 3D preserved down the cellular structure brain in the fossil record, at least for birds and for vertebrates, really. Sometimes you get lucky with invertebrates, not necessarily 3D preserved, but you can get more of a soft tissue preservation, or at least the more clear impressions of the soft tissue. But for birds, all you've got is the space in which the brain sat, which fortunately in birds is actually pretty close to the shape of the actual brain. So people have established that by comparing the volume of the both the actual brain in modern day or extant species of birds and the space in which the brain sat. So that leaves us, if you basically virtually fill in the space in which the brain sat, then you have something called an endocast. And you can look at the endocast and see the external shape of the brain. And a lot of times we like to look at those and say like, oh, this structure on the endocast, which corresponds to this brain structure, is really reduced in this extinct bird. And because we know that brain structure is involved in a given behavior, that must mean that behavior, maybe they had decreased behavioral capabilities for that particular function. But the problem with doing that is that we haven't actually established if there is a maybe quantifiable relationship between, for example, the overlying endocast structure and the underlying brain structure. And so that's what I'm seeking to figure out for my dissertation. How faithful are endocasts to the brains in birds? And by doing that, we'll end up with hopefully pretty strong quantitative relationship between the endocast structure and the brain structure, so that when you do have an extinct bird and you're lucky enough to have a three-dimensionally preserved skull, because birds really like to get smushed in the fossil record, you can look at the size just of the endocast structure and calculate what would have been the size of that related brain structure, and then incorporate that into larger analyses of brain structure size in their modern day avian relatives to see if this bird, extinct bird with a reduced endocast structure, is actually falling out as having a significantly smaller brain structure. And then potentially, if that's the case, talk about the functional and behavioral implications of that reduction.
Nice. Yeah, I really like that kind of research that questions a major assumption that we've been making, because you always see that where it's like, there's this it's larger in the part by the eyeball, so it probably had better vision. And then they have to write like a caveat like, well, we're not really sure about that because we don't know, but hopefully that's true.
And to be fair, that's an assumption that I've made too. Without doing these tests, that's kind of the assumption that any of us have to make if we want to say anything about brain evolution. But hopefully we'll be getting at some answers pretty soon. And by hopefully, I mean, you know what? I need to stop saying hopefully. We will be getting at answers pretty soon because I'm finishing my PhD by May. So we will be getting answers.
Nice.
Very cool. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us this week. And everybody who listened to this and wants to check out your work, definitely check out the Pastime podcast, because it is excellent and features these lovely people every time the episode comes out.
Oh, why, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Pastime Podcast. We had a lot of fun chatting and learning about stuff that's not strictly dinosaurs.
Yeah, and we did have to edit out some of the interview because we had a really great time talking. I think we might have talked for 3 hours or so between the two podcasts. So we have an extended interview that will be on our Patreon feed, which has even more stuff that's not related to dinosaurs.
But is related to paleontology.
It is, and it's fascinating. So I definitely recommend checking it out. But, we can't put like an hour-long interview in here. So if you want a longer form one, head over to our Patreon.
Before we get into our dinosaur of the day, we have another word from our sponsor, Indiana University Press. And I want to highlight one of the books in the series, Life Through the Ages, a commemorative edition. First published in 1946, Charles R. Knight's Life Through the Ages was for many a beloved first look at the strange animals of the prehistoric past. For much of the 20th century, Knight's reconstructions were the key resource for popular images of ancient life. His paintings and drawings were displayed as part of museum exhibits, notably at the American Museum of Natural History in New York and the Field Museum in Chicago, were used as illustrations in numerous books and magazine articles, and even influenced movie portrayals of dinosaurs and other prehistoric beasts. Knight's work was highly regarded both for its artistic skill and for its scientific accuracy, closely based as it was on the knowledge of its time. Although new discoveries and ongoing research have changed the view of many of the animals depicted by Knight, his work remains valuable and is still treasured by the new generations of scientists and paleo artists.
Oh, absolutely.
That iconic idea of T-Rex and Triceratops fighting, he was, I think, the first one to portray that.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so you can find out more about this book or their other books at iupress.indiana.edu. And now on to our dinosaur of the day, Tarchia, which was a request from Dinosaur 4602, so thanks. It was an ankylosaur that lived in the late Cretaceous in what is now Mongolia, and Tarchia had a broad, low body and short, strong legs. It walked on 4 legs, and its head was covered in armor. It also had osteoderms on the body and probably had a tail club. It had spikes on its back. Tarchia lived in the desert. It was probably prey for Tarbosaurus. One Tarchia skull has been found with tooth marks from Tarbosaurus.
Oh.
Yeah, well, it happens.
Poor guy.
Tarbosaurus had to eat.
Yeah, true.
It was found in 1970, Tarchia was, by a Polish-Mongolian expedition. They found a skull, and described in 1977 by Teresa Marianska. The type species is Tarchia kielinae, and the name means brainy one. The genus name comes from the Mongolian word tarki. It had a larger brain than other similar ankylosaurs. That's why it's named the brainy one.
I love that. I think we already covered the less brainy one.
Probably. And the species name is in honor of Professor Zofia Kielen-Jaworowska, who led the expedition that found the fossils. The holotype includes a skull roof, brain case, and parts of the rear of the skull. 3 other specimens were referred to Tarchia and included tail vertebrae, including part of the tail club and a scute, and a right humerus. In 1977, Tatiana Tumanova named a second species, Tarchia gigantea. And that was actually originally Dioplosaurus giganteus, which was named in 1956 by Malev. In 1987, Tumanova found that Dioplosaurus and Tarchia were the same, which made Dioplosaurus giganteus a senior synonym to Tarchia kialanae. Most scientists agreed, and the two names were combined into Tarchia gigantea. Then Victoria Arbor found that Dioplosaurus giganteus was a nomum dubium, not distinguishable from other ankylosaurs from the same time in Mongolia, and revived Tarchia kialanae, and she found that a specimen with a tail and club that was referred to Dioplosaurus giganteus was different from the Dioplosaurus holotype. She also found that the specimen Tumanova referred to be Tarchia in 1977 was actually Sycania, another ankylosaur from Mongolia, which was well preserved and defined how Tarchia was illustrated and depicted and changed how we thought Tarchia looked. Arbor found that the holotype of Tarchia was similar to Minotaurosaurus, which was named in 2009 by Miles and Miles, and that Minotaurosaurus was a junior synonym of Tarchia. In 2016, Pankowski and Tumanova found that the 1977 specimen that was referred to Tarchia, that Arbor thought was Sycania, had too many differences from Sycania and was actually a new Tarchia species, Tarchia terraceae. And they also found Minotaurosaurus to be its own genus. Estimates of the size of Tarchia have been based on Dioplosaurus giganteus. The holotype was one of the largest known ankylosaurs, so estimates were of it being about 26 feet or 8 meters long. However, Tarchia kialanae and Minotaurosaurus holotypes are smaller. Gregory Paul estimated in 2010 that Tarchia was actually about 14.7 feet or 4.5 meters long and weighed 1.5 tons.
And our fun fact of the day is very short and sweet, and it's that the famous paleontologist Barnum Brown was named after P.T. Barnum.
The circus guy.
Yeah, I just love that. Because they're the only two Barnums I've ever heard of. And
That's true, and I used to think they were related.
yeah.
So not by blood, but in some way.
Yeah, in spirit.
Yeah. And that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Happy New Year. Thanks again for listening, for being our listeners, for responding to our survey. Again, we're making changes based on that. And if you want to join our amazing community on Patreon, check out our page at patreon.com/iknowdino. Thanks again for listening, and until next time. Also, enjoy our new outro music by More Giraffes. The song's called Dinosaur.